praise your name. Though darkness falls all around, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. If I forget what I found, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. For you are faithful, Lord, you lift my head. You're my provider. You're my strength and joy. I'll trust you, Lord. I'll worship you. I love you, Lord. I'll honor you. Lord, I will lift up my soul. I will praise your name. I will praise your name. If I feel lost and alone, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. Though I may labor in vain, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. Through all the heartache and pain, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. For you are faithful, Lord, you lift my head. You're my provider. You're my strength and joy. I'll trust you, Lord. I'll worship you. I love you, Lord. I'll honor. I will trust you, Lord. I'll trust you, Lord. I'll worship everything I say. I love you, Lord. I'll honor you. I'll trust, never let me go. I'll worship, never let me down. I'll love, forever I will love you. I'll love, I'll trust every hour, every day. I'll worship, that's why I worship you. I'll praise you, Lord. I'll honor you. Lord, I will lift up my song. I will praise your name. I will praise your name.
Hallelujah. Let Lord Jesus Christ shine forth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. Welcome to another live stream with DCCI Ministries. We do hope that you are all well, as well as you will enjoy the evening, because we are traveling all the way to state and meeting with Dr. Cynthia, who is going to talk to us about marriages in Islam. There are lots of different version of marriages. If you kind of thought there is only one way, tonight we will be hearing there are actually many different ways. Before I kind of introduce our guest, can I just gently encourage those of you who are joining us in the live chat, please, if you want to get my attention, put @ in front of DCCI Ministries. That will get my attention. and please get my attention in the intention of what we are discussing. So topic is confusing Muslim marriages. So if there is anything you doesn't make sense to you, or it is not clear, you need clarification, or you need to urgently ask question, those are the moments we would encourage you to put @ in front of DCCI Ministries. As well as always, please do not abuse the chat. Don't do what Muhammad did to Aisha. Be gentle, be kind, and don't copy and paste the same thing again and again and again. It is not helpful to anyone. As always, do not share anyone's personal details in the chat. That includes email addresses, phone numbers, people's home address, and all other personal things. And can we just do a quick sound check with our guest? Peace of Christ be with you, sister.
The peace of Christ be with you, sister, and viewers.
Sister, can you just tell me in 20 seconds, what is your favorite biblical passage?
Wow.
You have to pick one.
I put together some of the ones that I find most blessing, and I call it like a morning mantra that I say to myself every day. And it starts with, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. And from that, we can just build to trust in the Lord, to look for the good things he's going to do for that day, and for him to fill us with his spirit and live a life of love. So those are some of my favorites.
Thank you very much, sister. And that was enough for us to get quick confirmation for the sound. And thank you very much for everyone who confirmed in the chat that sound was good. So, Dr. Cynthia, I'll kind of start with Dr. Cynthia. I think as the time goes on, I will be calling you sister. Do forgive me if that is not how you wanted.
That's perfect.
My understanding is that you head up, or you are behind a YouTube channel called Christians from Muslim, as well as you are a retired physician who has got decades of experiences to reach Muslims on evangelism, engaging with the churches, as well as dealing with Muslim background believers. Can you just quickly tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry?
Sure, sister. Thank you. Yes, I work now with ChristianFromMuslim.com and Christian from Muslim YouTube channel. We have hundreds of videos on both of these that not only answer Muslim questions, but we have a full series of lessons for Christians who want to learn how to talk to Muslims, how to evangelize them, and how to disciple them, because the questions they have, the worldview they're coming from, is so different. You will somewhat learn that today as we go through their views of marriage and their kinds of marriage, but that's what the website and YouTube channel do. As far as myself, I was raised with a lot of concern for missions and a lot of internationals, so I decided to become a missionary doctor. But right out of my medical training, I started working in America with immigrants here, and I mostly work here in America now with Muslims, also Hindus and Sikhs, although I have some done overseas. And I have experience working with women from at least 20 Muslim countries. And that's how I've heard their stories. I've walked with them through their problems. And some of that I'll be sharing here today. But of course, not personal details or accurate names or photos of them.
Thank you very much for that. So those of you who are watching us on YouTube, if you kind of have the view that evangelism is what's just happening at Speaker's Corner and you cannot stand what's happening at Speaker's Corner, please do go to description of this video where you will see link to Dr. Cynthia's YouTube channel and her website. That will help you to see different ways of evangelizing, and also as you heard, it will give you practical tips and encouragement how you can do evangelism, because there is no one formula. Every individual is unique because our God is unique. He made everyone differently. So check that out and prayerfully consider and do something about it, because there are lots of people who are dying and they don't know Lord Jesus Christ yet. And there are lots of people who are living their life without knowing Lord Jesus Christ. So those are good resources for you to check it out. Sister, you said you've been engaging with Muslim women couple of decades now, and you expressed that you are in touch with Muslims or ex-Muslim within 20 different countries. That's a lot of country. How do you reach those people? How did you get in contact with them?
Well, that's part of the beauty. Most of them I met in America through my volunteer work with a ministry where we mentor, we tutor, we help refugees and get settled here, and also just making friends and frankly some family members. So that's how I've gathered my experience. And I would like to say, as far as the different approaches of evangelism, we believe in our ministry that every time we're with a Muslim, we should do one of three things. We should build bridges, that is, do like Jesus told us to do, let people know that we love them, that we cared, or that there's some connection. The second thing is to share truth, especially share the gospel. And the third thing is to challenge Islam. I like it when we can do those three in order, because then we have a very solid foundation. But as an evangelist who trained me, Brother E from Palestine, said to me, unless Muslims really know that Islam is wrong, they're not going to have the strength to leave Islam. It is such a totalitarian way of thinking, has such a hold on them. And it's so fearful to leave that sooner or later, they do need to understand that Islam is wrong. And I'm sure people have examples where somebody never heard that and they just said, I saw a dream or vision of Jesus. But usually somewhere along the road, they at least had doubts about Islam. So the message I'm going to share today fits with exposing or challenging Islam. And the reason that I'm doing this, and maybe, Sister, you want to put up the first slide. I'm talking about confusing Muslim marriages because coming to it as an American or a Westerner, we are so confused. We're not expecting. It's like beyond our belief, out of what we would ever think or ask. So for people that I'm training that work with Muslims, they do need to understand that, because as you can see, are the slides visible to the audience?
Yes, so we are on the first slide, just the title.
Let's go to the second one. So I am going to give some true examples of cases that I know. I'll also be talking about principles and showing how the two work together. Now, to some degree, those Christians who know Ephesians 5 know that it says it's a shame, like haram, even to talk about the things that unbelievers do in secret. And a lot of what we will be talking about is kind of shameful. But we do need to talk about it, because Ephesians 5 also says that we need to have nothing to do with these deeds, but expose them. And it says we need to shine light in these dark places so that the people can see it. So that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to gloat over these sad situations, but to let people see them. And also, as Proverb 31 tells us, we who have the ability and the freedom need to speak for those who have no voice. That is part of our Christian calling. And when I see what's happened to so many of my dear Muslim sisters and how they have been treated and how they're trapped in this system, yes, I would like people to know about it. I would like them to see that this is wrong and there is a better way to live. And there are many examples in the past of where Christians have done this, for example, with sati in India, where they were burning wives alive. There are a lot of things that, praise God, have changed now because the light was shown into that darkness and it was exposed. So that's what we hope to do today. And we hope that by the time we're done, you will feel a little less confused. Or maybe you will be confused and startled thinking, well, I never even thought of that. So let's go on to the next slide that will show us some of the topics that we will cover today.
Yeah, before we move to the next slide,
Sure.
sorry, sister. So those of you who are joining us in the chat, as I said, our topic is confusing Muslim marriages, and we will be looking at a couple of different topics under this. So if you want to get my attention and then ask question to Dr. Cynthia, please put @ in front of your DCCI ministry, in front of DCCI ministries. I will pick that up and ask the question as we go on. Intention is not like, this is already confusing topic. Intention is not to cause more confusion. Intention is to make sure things are clear in your mind. As you make Muslims confused, you can use those things. So don't forget to kind of just jump in and then bring up your questions, and then I will cut off our speaker and then I will ask the questions. Yes, sister, I am on the slide 3 right now.
You're on the what?
I am on the slide 3. Yeah.
So I'm not going to read all of these, but I just want our viewers to see these are the topics that we plan to cover. We may not get through all of them in the next hour or hour and a half, but you can see it's quite a list. And if you go to the next slide, sister, it shows like a grid paper, a graph paper, and it says married or not, check one box. Well, that's the way Americans think about it. That's the way I used to think about it, very binary. Binary is a word people like to use now, which means one thing or the other. And that's what I was thinking. And I'm sure if our American and European and British viewers raised their hands, that's probably the way most of us are thinking, unless we have a lot of experience with Islam. Then we can see that there are some kind of gray zones where you're not really sure if they're married or what kind of marriage it is. So we're hoping that today will enlighten you on the principles of these kinds of marriages, and I will be giving you examples of many of these kinds of marriages.
So am I right to understand that we are not only going to talk about the teachings of Islam, but also how it has been practiced in the life of Muslims and what is their experiences, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's what's so important, I think, about this presentation, because many times you might hear, well, Islam says this, Islam says that. Or you might pick up a Quran or a book of the Hadith. You can see we have them on our shelves. And you might think, oh, that was just happening back then. But one of the main things I like to teach my students in Islamic seminars, in churches, online, wherever I teach them, is that these practices we see are related to principles. So I like to try to tie together how the principles of Islam relate to the practices. Most of them are not cultural, except as cultural arose from Islam. So I can give you some examples of what happened in the time of Muhammad, but also I can give you examples of what's happening now and how it's hurting people from Islam and how that is actually carrying over now that we have so many Muslims in the West and impacting Westerners as well. So, does the next slide say sacrament or contract? Or does it say married or not?
Married or not.
Okay, so that slide talks to you about how the binary thinking, but in Islam it's not so, and we hope to enlighten you. Now the next slide should talk about sacrament or covenant. And I wanted to start out with this because Christians, and by that even I include Westerners that come out of these nominally Christian cultures, and Muslims are approaching marriage from an entirely different basis. And this, I didn't realize myself until maybe 20 years ago, that for Christians, those of you who are watching, you're probably thinking, well, of course, marriage is a sacrament. And those of you who are Muslim that are watching are probably thinking, well, of course, marriage is a contract like other contracts. So this is a big difference in our way of thinking that we need to consider from the very beginning, because it impacts all the other kinds of marriages. Let's go to the next slide, which says, let's make a deal. And that's what the marriage contract is. It's a deal that is made theoretically between the bride, but in practice, probably most of the time between her adult male relatives and the groom or the groom's family. The next slide gives you a couple of thoughts about that. It says, sounds good. Well, when I first discussed this with some of the students I was mentoring from Saudi Arabia, and they were explaining, oh yeah, when I get married, I want this, this is going to happen. And I thought, there are some benefits to being clear right up front. You know, what is it that you want out of a marriage? And we don't necessarily have that built into Christian marriages, although I think a lot of pastors and marriage counselors do that in premarital counseling. And also we have prenuptial agreements usually when there are a substantial amount of assets to be involved. But for Muslims, it is a contract. And what I found is it's not only good just to know about, but also to talk to your Muslim friends about it. It's a good discussion point, especially if you are talking with young women. But you could also do this with married people. What was in your marriage contract? It's out of interest. And then that is actually kind of a bridge for you to do what in our ministry we call turnabout, where then you have your turn to explain how Christians see marriage. And believe it or not, that is a huge and important thing that can influence Muslims. I know of some that were astounded to find out what Christian marriage is and how it's different. So that's a good thing to keep in, so you understand where they're coming from, but also so you can make friends and ask about what they are thinking. But if you go on to the next slide, you'll see a couple of marriage contracts. These were just pulled off the internet. They're only one page. They're not thorough. But you can see the kinds of things that a modern English marriage contract for Muslims would have in it. That includes the statistics and, the demographics of who you are, your name, your age, that sort of thing. It also talks about something called the mahr. And I'm sure you've heard this on Harun's and other channels before. It's kind of a dowry. And in the marriage contract, you can discuss how much money is being presented up front. In this case, the money goes from the groom's family to the bride's family, but they can have some wiggle room and say, well, we'll give you this much now, but if you divorce, you can get the rest, or if you need it later. And you can see that can be problematic. But I'm letting you know that's one of the things in the marriage contract. We will come back to the mahr, and you will see how many problems that actually starts. We might have as a Christian corollary, it's not anything written in the Bible, but a lot of women have what's called a nest egg. And that means something that they can fall back on if there's a problem, which is the original idea of the mahr, that the woman has some security. And partly that's sad to say, because divorce has been so frequent and easy in Islam, and there's a lot of insecurity. So the woman or the father who's making the contract for the woman wants to be sure that she has some money available to her if she does get divorced and basically homeless. Okay, so let's look a little deeper into the contract with the next slide. You can see that when you make a list of this is what I want, and there's a list of this is what I want, a couple of things happen. You come to a marriage with expectations. Some of them may not be realistic and possibly can't even be fulfilled, but you feel like that is your right because of the contract. And to some degree, that sets up a husband and wife as adversaries. By that, I mean on different sides. This is what I expect from you. This is what I want. This is what you promised, and vice versa. But one really difficult, we might say, snafu or catch is that women can request that men that they will be the only wife. I've had several single women tell me, in my marriage contract, I will be the only wife. But look at the next slide and you will see what happens. We can't always enforce compliance on that because it's sort of like in America, they might have this in Britain too, you can't be forced to sign away your rights. And so it is with Islamic law. So if, if, for example, I enter into a contract with my boss that I won't sue him, he can do anything to me, well, that doesn't necessarily hold up if he does something illegal. And so you see here, now this came from a modern fatwa book about women, IFRW. You will see this coming up several times. That's Islamic fatwa regarding women. Fatawa is the plural. So the book has a lot of fatwa. So this is current, and it's out of Saudi Arabia in 2003. So if you read it, it says, this is a woman who is saying, my husband wants to take another wife, and I have done everything. He has no complaint against me. And the fatwa came down. You do not have the right to prevent him from marrying again, no matter what your activities toward him. He may desire more children, or he just may find that having only one wife does not keep him chaste. So you can't really question his motives. If he wants to do it, even if he's signed it, tough, So women going into marriage from the West need to realize, no, he can't sign away any of his rights in Islam, which, although he may tell you, but when you look at Surah 33, verse 33, and you have to be in seclusion, you can't leave the house, and the commentaries will say things like, yeah, you can't leave the house, you can't have friends in, all these crazy things. His rights on you cannot be disregarded with that, with the contract. Okay, now the next slide is just kind of a side thought. It talks about even former Muslims can have a problem with this. And I'm mentioning this, I'm not saying all former Muslims have problems. I'm not even saying all Muslims have problems in their marriages and that they don't have any traditional marriage. I'm saying that, sorry, allergy. This concept is really difficult to dispel, even in former Muslims. Could you take over for a second there, Hatun?
Yeah, that's okay. Sorry. So there are a couple of questions actually coming up in the chat regarding what is the mahr when gift or so-called money is given to woman in before marriage starts, or what is that money actually for? Is that money for we are gonna build our future together? I'll give you a little bit so you do the saving, or is that money traditionally known as given in the intention that he will have access to her private part? So there are some questions on this in the chat. And also, sister, I can't see you. When you feel ready, just jump in. Also, there is another comment is coming on. Do we know a little bit more details on what kind of informations in that marriage contract? So we saw 2 pages, but for example, anything in that marriage contract that I am going to spend all my life with you and we do our part in a best way that we can save this marriage and we die together as a husband and wife, such those basic informations in that contract. Or I don't know, such kind of vows, husband and wife next to one another.
Yeah, let's look at that in detail, those 2 questions. So the first is about the purpose of the mahr. And people that are kind of cynical about Islamic marriage say that the whole thing is to give the man exclusive access to the woman's sexual arrangement, her plumbing, whatever. So there is that kind of very gross way of looking at it, and that this is payment for it, almost like you would get in other settings. So that's the mercenary way of looking. The nicer way of looking is that it is security for the woman. It's meant to be for her. Now, there are a couple of exceptions coming up as we talk about difficult marriages, and I'd like to delay discussing about what the mahr is for in those cases, how it can be used. And we will come to that, but I'd rather do it in the whole setting of that situation so it makes more sense. The second question was, what else could be involved in it? I'm certainly not a Sharia lawyer. My understanding is that they can be different. That my understanding is there are some definite parts in it. Like if you read one of those, it says the woman cannot marry any non-Muslim. But in the male's one, it says he can marry a Christian or Jew, but no Buddhists, no mushrikeen, no atheists, none of that. So there are some kind of general things, but I believe that you can, according to, my friends saying that, yeah, you can put specific things in it. You could put in it that my husband will spend every night with me. Or you could put in it that my wife won't leave the house, or you could put in it my wife has the right to work. But the point is, the worry there is that according to modern fatwa, that doesn't matter. He can't sign away his rights. So you just, it would depend on the largesse or the goodness of the man you married. So I think this contract, although it sounds really good and I like a lot about it, and maybe Christians can learn a little from it about discussing their wants pre-marriage, but it really doesn't give you the security that you're hoping for as a Muslim woman. So that's my point here. And I will tell you how it's come up with some people I know later.
Okay, thank you. So
Okay.
we are in slide 12 on the marriage contract.
Right. Now let's go on to the next one. That's all I want to say about that for now. The other one is about vows. And the marriage contract does not incorporate vows. So this is why I'm saying we've got a totally different way of looking at it, whether it's a sacrament or a contract. If it's a sacrament, it's supposed to be something between you and your spouse and God, and you promise, you make some vows. I walked through this whole process with a woman who had converted from Islam and was going to marry a Christian, and she was shocked that there were vows. She wasn't even all that comfortable with it, because you have to make these promises that in Islam you don't have to make. So a couple of the slides that I have put out do have excerpts from the vows that we have in Christian faith that Muslims don't have. But things like, I will stay to you only until death do us part. These are things we take for granted as Christians, but they don't really have. Maybe they could put it in the contract, but again, the security is not there. So we're seeing it as before God, and we're seeing it as by God's grace, we're going to stay married for life. It's kind of a holy, or at least a special union. That's marriage. In Islam, it's a business deal, and a lot of business deals fall through. And I do have, evidence to support that. But that's just to get you to see, wow, we're coming at it from the right and the left. And you can see why people get confused. So let's look at the next slide.
Slide number
I told
4.
you-
Number 14.
Again, please excuse that I have a throat lozenge.
That's fine.
It should say I do at the top.
Yep.
Okay, so this particular case where I was walking with this young woman through her marriage, we were out shopping for her trousseau, and in the mall came on this song, ABBA. Has anyone heard the I Do song? I do, I do, I do, I do, I do. So I said to her, oh, we're shopping for your trousseau, and there's the I do song. That's what we say when you get married. She said, what? I said, yeah, the minister asks if you will marry this man, and you say, I do, right? And she said, no, 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 no. In Islam, we say no. Now, I'm not saying that this happens in all Muslim marriages, but in her particular, shall we say, subculture at least, which I don't think is totally unique, she said, as you see there, the first 2 times you're asked, you are supposed to say no, because it's polite and modest. Well, the Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So we don't do that coy thing. If the minister says, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? You say, I do. So that is not necessarily a huge thing, but it is confusing. I'm explaining that because it's part of the marriage ceremony that is confusing. Now, the next slide talks about a procession. Some of you may have been to Muslim weddings, or you've seen pictures of Muslim weddings, and you know that the traditional ones have the women in a separate room and the men. And usually the paperwork has been signed elsewhere by a sheikh, and then they're having a party. Well, this was an interesting one. A woman wrote in to the Saudi clerics and asked, is it okay if we have a wedding procession like the Americans do? And the answer was, no, you can't do that. It is not allowed to have a wedding procession with the groom being with the bride among the women during the wedding party. And it says the groom would be too shy. I thought, the groom is shy. So that's just an unusual fatwa that I threw in because it talks about a wedding ceremony difference. So those of you that are close to Muslims, walking with them through marriages, or those of you who are marrying a Muslim, or you're a former Muslim marrying an American, just be ready for a lot of surprises. There were a lot of shocks and surprises in this situation that I walked through. Okay, let's go to the next topic. Are there any questions on that, Hatun?
Just a quick practical questions on the picture we've got on the screen regarding the man and woman. So woman is wearing lots of makeup, and also she's got henna on her hands.
Yes.
So I understand that henna is very common in Islamic marriages where woman has lots of in her body. Is that correct? And why there are lots of makeup? Is that allowed in Islam?
Obviously, this picture is from a certain culture. And as far as the henna, yes, I've heard that too. I don't know if they have it all over their body, but I know that henna parties are popular a day or two before the wedding. It's kind of like a bridal shower. The bride's friends come over and do that. I don't think every wedding does, but I think that is just kind of a fun thing that they do. And I sort of, I wouldn't mind going to a party like that. I don't think it's unchristian or whatever. It's not a permanent tattoo. It's just a fun decoration. I've had Muslims do it to me, not a problem. But as far as the makeup, yes, this woman is dressed, I would say, like somebody from the Gulf. My experience is that women from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Persia or Iran are going to dress very elegantly for their wedding, and makeup is a huge part of it. More than we do as Americans. We look kind of simple compared to that. So I would say that I didn't mention this, but maybe you've heard this already, viewers, that there is not just one kind of Islam. There are many kinds of Islam, many kinds of Muslim women as far as cultures. Now, yes, we're talking about some cultural practices today that are across Islam, but things about how much of the body you cover. I mean, you may have seen some Muslim tribes in Africa where the women are topless, but they wear hijab. So things are applied differently throughout the Muslim world. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, sister. Next slide is about Muslim-Christian marriage. This actually came up. If Muslims are allowed to marry Christians, yet they cannot marry with pagans, does that not make Christians monotheists? But I'll let you to kind of make a comment on it as we go.
Does it make Christians what?
Does this make Christians monotheist?
Well,
So
yes.
Islam.
Yeah. I know. Either that's a very simple question or it's a complex question. We're saying that, Muslims think we're shirk, that we have three gods, many of them, but perhaps that's inconsistently applied because they do consider Christian and Jewish women to be monotheist enough to marry. And a couple of those reasons will come up here if we go to the next picture. But just here you see rules and risks. So we're going to talk about the rules and risks with Christian-Muslim marriage. We do have a whole video on our lessons page for the website, Should Christians Marry Muslims? So we're not going to cover everything in this topic today, but I did want to cover a couple of things so that you can get an idea of the legality of it and the risks. So it is the rules and the risks, not a whole bunch of testimonies like we have online. So as you see in the next one where it says a Muslim man can marry a Christian woman, and that's Quran, Surah 5, verse 5. And the reasons that have been bandied about is that it helps spread Islam. This is a good way to spread Islam, to marry a lot, to take, some people would say, women from the Christian tribe, bring them into your tribe, and have them make babies for Islam. So that's one of the reasons. It's felt that the man is not really at risk marrying a Christian woman. He can let her practice her faith, although in the other video discussion we talk about where that doesn't usually work out well. But in theory, he can do that. And at this time, many women are being seduced to marry Muslim men. It is actually on one of their agendas, probably more than one of their agendas for spreading Islam in the West, is to marry Western women. They don't give them the full picture of Islam. Of course, they're thinking of Christian mostly in nominal terms, but sadly, even some true Christians can fall into this trap when they're greatly courted and told, I love you. I will let you worship the Lord. I'm not coming against that. I just want to be part of your life. And we'll put it in the contract. So there are some very convincing things that can be said. And the main thing against it, of course, is that we should not be unyoked to unbelievers. But the other topic this brings up is less romantic. It's called love jihad. And in love jihad, it has to do with basically women being either groomed gradually, little by little, to marry a Muslim man if they are Christian or Jewish. If they're polytheists in India, they're having this problem. If a Muslim guy wants to marry a Hindu, he has to convert her first, or it's bad news. And there's a case where at least one got killed for not converting, and he couldn't handle it. But we know from the Boko Haram in Nigeria, I personally know a family of Egyptians whose daughter they was threatened to kidnap. They actually tried to kidnap his daughter. What they do commonly in Egypt is, and India, kidnap women, marry them, and halas, that's it. They're either converted to Muslim and they send a letter to the families, or they just keep it. And in most of these cultures, they're not as open as America. I was speaking to a Nigerian about the kidnappings and forced marriages in Nigeria, like the Boko Haram and the girls that were kidnapped from the school that are Christian. And I said, isn't it true that if they get rescued and they go back, they're considered tainted and, and not really marriage material? And he said, yes. So that really destroys lives. I wish that Islam did not give them the right to marry Christian women, because that puts us at risk. Although they could, just, I guess, try to force them to convert anyway, like they have done with some in India. So this family whose daughter was attempted to be kidnapped did move to America. Thank God for America. But it's sort of like the way Hatun is fighting to preserve the rights in America. In Britain, we need to preserve our rights here too, because this is the last place, where we can live as Christians in some degree of safety and say what we believe. So if that's taken away from us here, we're in big trouble. As the woman I disciple online in our videos says, she's a Muslim who became a Christian. She says, Cynthia, if Islam gets control or influence in America, women will become nothing again. And she's so happy to have moved to America because she doesn't feel that oppression that she felt overseas. So is there a question on that before we go on to women? Women marrying. The next slide.
There was a question on, I'm hearing echo from your side, but there was a question on, we haven't come to that topic yet, but on the divorce on Christians, I think I will bring that up as we move to that part of your presentation. There is a question on, can Christians get divorced if there is the domestic violence? But I will bring that up when you kind of talk about halal marriage or others.
Right. Okay, so then just to mention about women on the next slide, women do not have the right to marry non-Muslim men. That's in the Quran, Surah 2:22. The thinking here is that she should not be under the power of an infidel. It just goes without saying in Islam that the women are under the authority and control of a man. So if she's under the control of an infidel, that wouldn't be acceptable. Of course, we don't like it the other way around either, with her under the control of a Muslim, but this is the Sharia we're talking about, the Muslim law. And also by her not doing that, it keeps Islam from spreading. If she marries out of the tribe of Islam, it wouldn't spread Islam. And they feel it's just so undesirable. So that goes all the way back to the beginning. Now, the next slide actually talks about what happens if a Muslim or former Muslim does marry a Christian man. And I do have an example of this. So one of my Muslim contacts actually, yeah, I can mention, this was said by the Kuwaiti woman I disciple online. She said it's considered fashionable now, even desirable for a Muslim woman to marry an American, could be a Brit too, but he does have to convert to Islam. So there's, within the last few years, there has been a lot of rumble about this. And if you can get an American guy to marry you, that's a bit of a cachet, of a feather in your cap. It's good. But he needs to at least nominally convert. But look at the next slide. Since it is forbidden in the Quran, if he hasn't converted, you need to get that marriage annulled as soon as possible. And if it is found out that she knew he was not converted or that he was an infidel or a Christian, then she will face what they call legal punishment. So she is going to get punished. And if the groom converted to marry her and they find out it wasn't a sincere conversion, he gets his head chopped off. That's what it says. And this is again from Islamic fatwa regarding women. So there are risks, and that's why what I wanted to talk about in this, not all of the ramifications and should it happen, just what these risks are of marrying. Okay, now this leads to the next problem, which if you turn the slide, you will see is marriage validity. And this is something that I have faced, people I know have faced. And I'll give you a couple of examples because some marriages are recognized here, but not there, overseas. Some marriages are recognized overseas, but not here. And then we have Christian marriage, which is here, there, and everywhere. We're always married. It doesn't matter what country we're in or what planet we're on. We have just continue, our marriage is stable. It's a sacrament. It's not a contract. So you don't think about which country honors that contract. But let's think about two situations. One is, what if you are overseas and you are a second wife? And I do know a case like this. I was talking to a woman about one of her relatives who was a second wife, didn't like it, felt she wasn't having a good opportunity, and might want to come to America to live and get married here. Do you see the problem? She's married over there. She's a second wife. But so far, praise God, we don't accept that in America. So what do we do in America? I mean, how do I advise someone like this? I'm just sharing with you some of the complications I've had. Do we bring that woman here and just not tell anybody she's married over there because it's not valid here? It's bigamy. I mean, that's one of the things I've faced. Whoa, how do we do that? Especially if the husband is difficult, beating, restrictive, won't give a divorce, whatever. Now, the second kind of problematic marriage is one that I call here, but not there. And that's the sort of marriage where a Muslim woman or a former Muslim woman marries an American who's not a Muslim, maybe he's a Christian, but he'd be considered an infidel. And I do know one Muslim woman who married here who told me a couple of times, when I go overseas, my marriage isn't valid. And really, guys, I think that she believes it, even though she was married in the United States according to our law. But this idea of the marriage contract is so stable that now she is overseas and the question is, okay, in that country, they don't recognize a marriage to an infidel. So not only could she marry again, her family could force her for marrying again, to marry again, and it's just really uncomfortable. This is the kind of thing that when I went through it with these people, I'm thinking Americans would never think of this. These are just beyond our thinking. And that's why I want to bring it to your attention. Are there any questions on that?
No, we can continue. We can continue, sister.
The next slide is also talking about married or not, but this is about uncertainty. The other one was married or not validity, which marriages are legally valid. This is certainty. And this can also be very confusing. One of the young women I was working with said, when I asked if she wanted to meet, my husband is visiting this weekend. But then not long later, she said, oh, I'm getting married this summer. I'd like you to come to my wedding overseas. And I was thinking, you told me your husband is here. So I did ask other friends, what does that mean? Is she married or not? And the best we could come up with is that in Islam, because you do have signed paperwork, and then also there is the party component. Remember, it's not like the procession where the groom goes down and it all happens together. That possibly either there was a temporary marriage, which we'll talk about later, or there was some kind of paperwork, but no party and reception. So that's something you could also find confusing. And not only did I find it confusing, but a former Muslim who knew both of us was talking with me, and she said, oh, we need to get her a better husband. And I'm thinking, well, if she's already married, Christians, we don't go around trying to find husbands for people that are already married. So that also reflects some of the uncertainties, some of the ideas of contract versus sacrament that we face as Westerners working in the Muslim world. Any question about that, or we can go on to the next topic, which is family influence.
No, it just give me the idea that like you buy, I don't know, you buy like a t-shirt and you don't like this t-shirt, and then you say, okay, I'm gonna get better t-shirt, and then you go and then visit another shop and then buy another t-shirt, or you go and buy hummus from Waitrose. You don't like that one, you say, yeah, M&S hummus is better, you go and get it from M&S. It seems the same. Or we need to get her a better husband, so we need to go to the different shop to get a better husband.
And I can understand that with Islamic thinking, because it's a contract, you're not living up to your side of the bargain, or I have, men have the right to divorce for any reason. But coming from somebody who had become a Christian, it just showed that ideology is very difficult to bring back to the idea that it's a sacrament.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one, I decided to cluster together 3 kinds of things under family influence. That would be arranged marriages, child marriages, and incestuous marriages. So arranged marriages are probably less common than they were before, but they still do happen. A lot of times what I hear, and I'm sure Hatun has many examples as well, there is an introduction, usually through the families or somebody else, a friend of the family. So it's not like, Jacob and Leah, where you're marrying somebody that you never met, but there usually is that kind of an introduction where the ones I hear that you do kind of have a right of refusal. But what happens is these tend to be presented in young girls. And this is part of the women's rights issue that really concerns me, because families often encourage young girls to be married. There is a city in the United States that's predominantly Muslim. You probably have this in areas in Britain, but they take the women or the young girls out of school at 14 because they're marriageable age, and they try to find spouses for them. So that kind of goes over into the area of child marriage. And what happens, you can see here with arranged marriage, is if you have young girls, you find that they're not really getting educated. And in Islam, you need to have children if you're a decent wife. So they start that right away, and these young women get trapped. Okay, even if they could get divorced, what are they going to do if you're 14, you haven't graduated from high school, you're not qualified for anything, you're tied down with a bunch of kids? So that is a concern of family arranged marriages, is this idea of women that are trapped. And then when we're counseling these women, as maybe Hatun is, and as I sometimes am, you're thinking, what can you tell women when they are trapped like that? You know, we can say women's rights, whatever, but it is challenging. So a lot of prayer and wisdom is needed. And on the next slide, we talk a little more about it because of marriage with relatives. So since parents are worried, I don't know if you've heard of the idea of urd. I'm not sure I'm saying it right, but urd. But the concept basically is that the honor of the family depends on the behavior of the women, which is such a double standard. The guys can do almost whatever they want, but you've got to have your women pure. So that means when your young girls get towards marriageable age, you have to think about it seriously. In some countries, they do it even before they hit puberty, just to be sure. So what are the opportunities there? Well, that's why we get relatives. And I will tell you, I'm not surprised that often the women that I meet are married to first cousins, and their mothers were married to first cousins, and everybody's married to cousins. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is early on, when you have large family gatherings, it's possible that the girl cousins meet the boy cousins. Yeah, at a certain time, they need to be a little more sequestered. But before the age of hijab and stuff, they meet them. And then the aunts talk, and people start thinking, oh, your boy and my girl, blah, blah, blah. You know, this is discussion in family gatherings. I'm not sure how many of you have been a lot in Arab cultures, but I think you will agree with me if you have, that there is an awful lot of discussion about marriage and who should, you know, do this or that, because a lot of the women have not had the benefit of education. So that's how the family is involved. Then the family decides the mahar. Another reason that people tend to marry their relatives is because you really don't want that mahar to leave your extended family, your tribe. And if you allow your woman to marry some other group in your culture, they have control over the mahar. I mean, yeah, theoretically, the mahar is for the woman, but as you are finding out, it doesn't always work that way. So it's nice to keep that money in the family. Why? Because that man may divorce the wife and may keep it, even though he shouldn't. So there's the mahar motive for intermarriage. And I'm telling you, as you probably already know, it is not good to keep intermarrying. It's very bad. The problems that are very common in Muslims in the Middle East, especially deafness. There's a huge hospital research institute entirely related to deafness. And I do know one of my Muslim friend's son has severe deafness. And another one is blood diseases, that kinds of anemias. And then in general, it's just thought if you keep marrying your relatives, your IQ is not benefited by that. So it really is a problem, all of this family influence as far as marrying the women young, that keeps them bound. Then they have children. If you go into any Arab communities, between all the birth defects and the wars, you're going to see a lot of disabled kids. And that's something I tell people that work with Muslims is expect to see disabilities, expect that every family has somebody in it that's disabled. And we need to have a heart of compassion for that. So any questions on that?
Just I'm hearing echo from this side. I don't know what you've done in that side, but just a couple of quick comments. In the arranged marriage, it is still seen and also practiced. Yes, in some part of the Western world, that family or someone introduced people or families who they intend to get married. And in those meetings, potential husband and potential wife never, I don't know, never went to cinema together, never take a walk together, or never sat one-to-one to have conversation or discussion. It's always been in the crowd. Sometimes like all they know about their faces about each other. Also, we do still have examples where in the arranged marriage, family arranged everything, husband and wife get to see one another on the night of wedding. That's like still can be seen. Also, one of the things I noticed in the
is this all one from one person? Is this all from one person?
yeah.
Okay, because that's two issues so far. I would like to respond to, or do we need to have all three if we can remember them? Go ahead.
Let me make the last point as well, and then also another thing I noticed regarding the arranged marriage is marrying with the relative. One of the thing in Muslim mind is there is a shame and honor culture. If you marry with someone who is your relative or who is your close family circle, it is practically kind of very shameful for you to divorce that person or that person to be asked for divorce, because that brings whole shame and honor to the community. Brings shame to the community. So you do your best, even there is abuse or lots of other things going on, you do your part to keep that marriage because you don't want to bring shame to the whole community and whole relatives. Do you want to make any comment on anything I said, sister?
Yeah, on all of them.
Yeah.
Let's deal with the last one about shame. Yes, that is important, and families do come up with that. But it's not just if you marry your relative. One associate of mine in her first marriage, her husband was beating her so badly, she was purple, she didn't think she could handle it. And her family told her, stay married to him. We don't want the shame if you don't. So I think that's used for everybody. Yeah, I can think of other cases too, even in America, where the shame angle is brought up. I definitely agree. It's a shame and honor culture. So we'll talk more about some of the pressure on women not to divorce. But yeah, shame and honor is a good one. As far as these other arranged marriages they're talking about, these must be in things like very restrictive microcultures that are not typical of the West. We think maybe of the Amish or some cults, possibly some branches off of Mormon cults and other things, but it's no way typical. What might be typical is your friend knows somebody and they have you over to dinner with that person, you know, or maybe your cousin or something like that, very casually. But what he's describing is not generally reflective. It's an extreme exception of behavior that's not really acceptable as a Western norm.
Okay.
Does that answer them?
Yeah. Just also another question on what is nikah? What is the definition for the nikah?
Yeah, we haven't really gotten to that yet.
Okay.
So, and I know you dealt with that a couple of days ago too, I think, or was it a couple of weeks ago? But yeah, uh, that is a term that the Quran uses for marriage. Modern people will say it's actually kind of the curse word, like the F word, but that is what was used. Now, my trying to give the benefit of the doubt to the situation, I look at Shakespeare or the old translations of the Bible and how usages of words have really changed. So, now if we call something Joaz or a marriage, they use a different word. But yeah, they do use the word nikah in some of the marriage contracts, etc. I don't like to say that word much because modern Arabs are kind of like, ew, don't say that, like I don't like to be around people using cursing words, but that is in there. We'll
Okay.
talk about some kinds of that later.
Okay.
But
We can move to child marriage if you
okay, so
want.
let's go to child marriage. You can see that this is already part of what we've discussed with relatives marriage, because usually it's the parents that are working on the child marriage. So the main reason we have the biggest problem, which is the marriage of young children, is because we know from the two ways really. We know that Muhammad did it, and whatever Muhammad did is good forever, which I think in a way can be used as a strong argument against Islam. Wouldn't God know that it wouldn't always be great to marry young children and to have people doing it? But as has been discussed on this channel before, yes, Muhammad did marry Aisha when she was about 9, had some kind of sex with her, but not real intercourse till she was 9. So about 6, he connected with her. About 9, he actually married her. She was with her dolls. She was not interested. And I have a fairly contemporary example of that, of a woman in Iran whose parents arranged the marriage, and she was playing with dolls, and they brought this guy over to marry her. They'd arranged it. She just wanted to play with dolls. And he said to her, "You don't need to play with dolls. I'm your husband now. Like, I'm your new toy." That's just not really consoling to a young girl, but that is one of the examples I have of things that have happened. Now, we do need to point out with this, because Muslims will try to deny it, or they will say, oh, that's just the hadith. We need to point out that in Surah 65, verse 4, it gives the rules of how to divorce women that don't have their periods. And also in the books of Fatawa, for women, it talks about them. In the Sunni books, I have the Shia book back here talking about how to divorce your prepubertal wives. So this is not only with Muhammad, it's still valid in the Sharia, which I am not happy about. And if we look, we see that if we talk to students, younger people coming here, we'll find out that a lot of their mothers were in this situation of an underage marriage. Now, there is a little good news, and that is that Egypt is one of the countries who has signed on to a bill of African children's rights. They have signed against underage marriage, which is less than 18. I don't know how many countries have done that. But as we know, with the people who signed the UN Charter for Religious Freedom, this doesn't always get followed anyway. So, yeah, okay. We do have public examples. We can see online pictures of old men. You think they're with their granddaughters. It turns out that they are their children. There was a really good movie, but kind of depressing. Don't watch it when you're having a low day, called Osama, about Afghanistan and the child marriage there and child porn rings. It's really heartbreaking. But it shows that is something that was going on in their culture. So it's going to be harder to get to remote villages in Afghanistan, perhaps, than in the big cities in Cairo. So let's go on to the next slide, which gives you 3 examples. I did give you the doll swap marriage deal example in child marriage. And then these are 2 other ones from families of women I know that told me what happened to their mother. The first one was the double deal trick. And this is where the families are arranging things. And there was a brother in a family who wanted to marry a woman. And they cut out a deal where the young woman in that family would first marry this undesirable guy in the other family. I think he was slightly retarded. But the double deal was, have your daughter marry him, and then we will let our daughter marry your son. So there was a double deal. Guess what happened? After the first marriage, the family backed out on the second one. They didn't let their daughter marry this young man, but the innocent young woman was stuck with this retarded guy that she didn't choose. So that, you know, that's really bad parental influence in child marriage, I think. I mean, does anybody on the chat there think that's good? No, that was a dirty trick, a double deal. And then besides double deals, there's the financial deal. And the financial deal, one woman told me, when I was 15, my dad sold me like a dog to an old man. And, you know, she hated it. She was never happy in that marriage. And the double trick marriage didn't go well either. So the parents having the influence over these children does do bad things, and I've seen the results of it in several cases. Let's go on to the next one, which is halal incest, I call it. Halal meaning acceptable or good. And this is another thing that's like totally out of our minds, especially Christians, because we know Leviticus 18. When we're reading Leviticus 18, we go through there and think, oh my, you know, this is such a long, gross, boring list of you can't have sex with this person, you can't have it with that person, you can't have this. And you're thinking, well, why doesn't it just say, you know, marry a woman and that's it? But when you see what comes out of other cultures, you can see why sometimes explicit lists are necessary. So I gave you a copy here out of a book of, this is actually by Asistani. It's a Shia book. No, wait a minute. No, this is out of the 5 schools of Islamic law. It's a different book. So these are Sunni. But it says that Shafi and Maliki schools, there are multiple schools in Sunni, mainly 5 big ones, consider a man marrying his daughter born of fornication as permissible, and also marrying his sister, his son's daughter, his daughter's daughter, his brother's daughter, his sister's daughter, because they are legally strangers, which means that they don't inherit. So you can marry anybody who's not really inheriting. This is like, to Americans, this is one of those, what? A man can marry his daughter as long as he wasn't married to the woman that he made her with? That's kind of shocking, you know, because there are a lot of, I mean, I can think of a case right now where that could happen, and you can marry them young. It's almost like you could breed up your own wives. So that's pretty bad. Also, as far as not marrying sisters, we know we can't do that in the Bible. And we've already talked about how these close marriages are resulting in birth defects. And this sort of thing certainly won't improve it. They didn't mention in this list the daughter-in-law which, as you know, with Muhammad and Zainab, that he encouraged his son to divorce her so that he could marry her, and now adoption is illegal. But it comes into this category of what Christians would consider incest and what Muslims consider halal or acceptable. Okay, so do we have time here to go through temporary marriage?
So we've been live approximate 1 hour 20 minutes.
Okay.
I propose we stop here, and then maybe like all we covered, if you can make a comparison with kind of overall Christian marriage, so far what we covered and what Bible teaches on Christian marriage, and then we can have another session and then pick up where we left. What do you think, sister?
I think we can do that. Let's see. It looks like we are about
Halfway
through the
through.
material that I want to cover. But maybe we could, since we're summarizing, we could look at the last 2 slides, which I put in as optional. They're a woman in white, and it's probably like slide 66 there.
Yeah.
Where it talks about why to get married. So we started out with the idea of how different the contract concept of marriage is with the sacrament concept. And then here, this gives you a little more idea of the Muslim idea of marriage. Most of us know that Islam is very family oriented. There are always good and bad things about it. And I'm not going to say there's nothing likable about Middle Eastern and Islamic culture. There are some good things, but there are some really, really challenging things. So in a way, it's good to honor marriage, but the extent to which they go isn't great, and the approach isn't great. So I put down here where it says, why get married? Do we have that slide up?
Yeah.
It says, Muhammad encouraged and patterned marriage. And Muhammad said, nikah, he was using that questionable Arabic word, is my sunnah. Whoever leaves my sunnah is not from amongst me. That shows how highly that he honored it. And in another book, he said, there is no foundation that has been built in Islam more loved by Allah than marriage. And some of you probably have heard the verse from the Quran, 30, verse 21, which sounds actually very good, that one of the good things God did was create for you wives so that you can live in peace and there can be harmony between you and repose, some rest and comfort. So there is this kind of view of marriage. And I mention that to you because remember the glowing way that marriage is presented, especially to Western women. There's a lot of recruiting going on, and we see this almost every day around us, of how women are being seduced with nice things like these verses. And in isolation, they might not sound too bad, but on the other hand, Muhammad was including multiple marriages, much marriage, and that kind of destroys this beautiful idea of the man and the woman. And I would quote from you also one other modern thing from the fatwa of Islamic fatwa regarding women. It says, okay, they're asking, why do you marry a woman? And they give 4 reasons: her wealth, her lineage, her beauty, and her religion. And they say that mainly she should be married for her religion. So you can see that a wife is considered something good. If you read a lot of the other hadith, which we're not covering because this one is strictly related to marriage, but I have, and I know Hatun has other lectures we do talking about these difficult fatwa with women. But the idea that women is kind of a commodity, she is a tilth, She is a possession like donkeys. You marry her because she's beautiful, she's got a good family, she's got money, or she's religious. You see how that contrasts with the Christian idea, where when God created women and men, he created one man and one woman. And he said that Eve was a helper. That sometimes they say the old word is helpmate. The other is a suitable helper. And people can interpret that from a wild variety of ways. I think in most circumstances nowadays, a helper is actually at the same or higher level, like if you're helping your kids with their homework or you help whatever. So, but there is some way that men and women can work together. They're seen, even Jesus confirms that the two are one flesh, and that should not be broken up. So our approach as Christians is that God created a man and woman in his image to work together in a monogamous relationship. And it's hard for us that come from Christian backgrounds to look at the Muslim marriage and see it as something different than a contract where a woman is, to some degree, a commodity. And I'll just leave you with this concept. Maybe we can talk about it again. But many or most Christians pray every day the Lord's Prayer. How many of you remember what it says in the Lord's Prayer? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that has such a huge influence that we don't even think about or recognize. But when Christians are doing on earth as it is in heaven, we're trying to do on earth as it is in heaven. What are those things? And I'll let you think about those things, but those are things that we would say would be positive: being with God, learning things, understanding, fellowship with one another. It's a very intellectual and then heartwarming kind of experience. And yes, there's a lot of beautiful stuff, but there's no mention of sex. As most of you probably know, the Muslim view of paradise is so different. It's entirely sensual. And there's talk of how many virgins you get and the food and the water and all of that. So in closing, I will say, when a friend of mine was complaining to me that all her husband thought about was having sex with women, especially Russian women. And I said, you know, he's trying to do on earth as it is in heaven. And Muslim men are allowed to do that. So I leave you with that vision of what is the difference between the Christian vision of earth and of heaven, and Jesus telling us to bring his kingdom to earth, and what is the Muslim view. And I do believe that impacts marriage. Well, I thank everyone who stayed with us and watched these. Hopefully it will start sinking in. Maybe if we do this again later, you can have questions, or you can send them to DCCI, or you can send them to us. We'd love for you to watch more of our videos at Christian from Muslim YouTube and christianfrommuslim.com. Thank you. May God bless you and show you his truth and love.
Thank you, sister. I've got one question which came up a couple of times. I will bring that up. And also, those of you who are watching us, you will see the description of Dr. Cynthia's YouTube channel and website on the description. Please do follow that up. So question is, as a Christian, do you encourage Christians to marry with Muslims, or Christians to have interfaith marriages?
Absolutely not. Jesus told us to that light and darkness don't have fellowship, that we should not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And when you think about what we're talking about of marriage as a sacrament, we need to have things in common so that we are helping each other in our work. We're not pulling different directions. We do have a whole lesson on our lessons page of the website. If you go down lessons, it says, should Christians marry Muslims? We also have like a 20-some page study guide on Should Christians Marry Muslims. These give a lot of examples, a lot of background information in it that's not even covered in the video. And we do have some short videos on the topic if you don't want to watch the full lesson. We have George Husnian and a Palestinian talking about it, and we have some other people giving their impressions, like George Saig. Both these Georges run ministries to Muslims, and a woman who's giving her opinion. So we do have a lot about that on our website. If you need more than just my answer of no, please don't.
Thank you, sister. And this is serious last question. Does the triune God have different view of married man and woman versus single man and woman? And does the Lord Jesus Christ have different love and view towards married or single people?
Very good question, because we just heard from Islam that marriage is not only highly honored, it's commanded. And there are other places where it says if a man's not marrying, he's not doing his Islamic duty. We don't have that in the Christian faith. Each person has their calling. I believe the Christian life is peace and purpose, peace with God, peace with inside our hearts, peace with each other, and we all have a purpose. And the Bible clearly does say that some people do have a calling not to be married. Now, I'm not saying that in the way it has been said traditionally in some churches, like the Catholic Church, where it around the mid-7th century forbid marriage if you wanted to serve God. I'm not saying it in that sense, but I'm saying absolutely God loves married and unmarried people all the same. He has a plan for you wherever you are. As Dr. Francis Schaeffer used to say, it's almost like a chessboard, and each one of us have things we can do. And God puts us in that area for the game he's playing. It's also been called in a book, The Sacred Romance. God has a place for us by the romance, kind of like an adventure or a story. And every one of you have a position in it. Don't worry if you aren't married. You can pray that God loves you. He will provide what's best for you. And if you are married, God can use you in that situation too, even if it's not an ideal marriage. So wherever you are today, viewers, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
Thank you very much, sister. So overall, yes, Islamic marriage and Islamic relationships are so confusing. But when we turn to Lord Jesus Christ, the main thing is, doesn't matter you are married, doesn't matter you are single, you are very much loved. And eternal Son of the Father gave himself for you and asked you to be his. So I'm guessing, and I'm sure we will have part 2 of this presentation again in coming weeks. Thank you very much everyone who joined us and took part in the chat. I was intentional. I don't think I missed any question, but if I do, we can take them and then bring them up in our next live stream when we have Dr. Cynthia. As I expressed, you can follow her work in the description of this video, and also subscribe to her YouTube channel to follow up what's coming. As always, beloved ones, Christ crucified, silent you with his love, and dear Muslim guests, we do hope that you give up, and we do pray that you give up this ideology and turn to eternal Son of the Father, because there is no life without him. Dr. Cynthia, thank you very much for joining us. God bless you all.
So much. I enjoyed it.